Hello and welcome to Reddit or Not. I am Ron Chabuduo, and today we are looking at property line malicious compliance. This first story demonstrates why you need to know where to draw the line. My neighbors wanted to call a professional to mark their property line. My parents agreed. This was a long time ago, but I remember it clearly. We moved into a community with tight space in between our house and our neighbors, and we didn't like them being able to see into our kitchen. We put up a bunch of plants costing thousands, but my parents thought it would be worth it. A week later, my parents awoke to the plants completely chopped down. My father was furious and marched down to our neighbor's house. He told my father the plants were on his property line. Therefore, he had total right to take them down. He warned that if anything were to go on his property again, he would report us to the authorities immediately. Later that day, my father called the company that put in the plants, and with the warranty, we could have them replanted next week for no charge. We made sure there was no way it was on our neighbor's property. However, a few days later, we caught him chopping them down at 2 a.m. We called the police for destruction of property. And after a chat with my neighbor, he decided to call a professional and mark his property line. My father agreed. A few days later, I got home to find orange tape in my neighbor's yard. Apparently, his fence was 11 feet over our property line. We watched as he took down his fence, completely furious. Within the next month, we were enjoying our new space and privacy in our backyard. And my neighbor ended up losing 1/4 of his backyard. My neighbor ended up having to pay almost $10,000 for the destruction of our property. And we got to plant our plants again. Too long, didn't read. My neighbor chopped down our plants because he claimed we were on his property. After calling a professional, he lost 11 feet of his backyard and had to pay for destruction of property. And we got to keep our plants. You should know where the line is before cutting things down. This next story is short but hilarious. Respecting property lines. First post here, so hopefully this is appropriate. I work for a lawn care landscaping company. We have a subdivision where we do like 15 yards or so, depending. Anyways, this one yard is super easy. We are in and out in like 15 to 20 minutes, depending on detail stuff. The problem was the neighbor, typical nosy old biddy. She was always complaining we were crossing the property line, would stare out her window the entire time. We were doing the yard work, making sure we didn't cross her line. Apparently, the last guys that went there stepped on her side of the imaginary line, and she freaked, calling the owner. Basically, he told us to avoid dealing with her as much as possible, and just stay on our own side. We had a pretty big storm one weekend, so limbs were everywhere. I was picking up the limbs when I saw her watching me, so I decided to be a jackass. I grabbed a shovel and went down the property line, breaking any limb, even the little ones, and only picking up the half on our side. I just looked up at her and smiled, and carried on. She had a fence up the next week. I would have loved to see her face as you were collecting your half of the sticks. They had to dig up a whole lot of dirt for this next story. Want me to move my pond over? Okay. This happened some years ago. I bought 4 acres and a house out in the country. The neighbor in this story has about 6 acres. The people I had bought the property from put in a small pond several years before, and when they did, part of the raised ground surrounding the water went over the neighbor's property line, maybe 5 to 10 feet. I didn't know about the property line issue when I bought the place. About a year after I moved in, my neighbors decided to have a fit about the property line. They claimed the previous owners had promised to move the raised area, and if I didn't move it, they would. Plus, they would take me to court about it. After going back and forth about it with them, threatening lawyers and coming to my work to argue about it, I told them I would move it. So I contacted a guy with a small bulldozer, and I told him too that I wanted him to reshape the pond. It was summertime by then, and the pond had mostly dried out as it was shallow. I wanted it deeper and to move the dirt on the neighbor's side inward by a few feet. Now for the malicious compliance. Making the pond deeper and moving the dirt wall meant I now had a lot of extra dirt that needed to go somewhere. I told him, pile that dirt up along the neighbor's property line as long and as high as you can. Make it so that it blocks the view between our 2 properties, which he did. The new dirt wall between my neighbor and me stretches from the pond to most of the way down the property line and is about 10 feet tall. My neighbor was pissed, but there wasn't anything he could do. There's a ruling that says no structure on the property line, but dirt isn't a structure. He tried to get the local neighborhood board involved, but I just ignored their letter offering to move the dirt for free as they didn't have a case, and I liked having the dirt wall between us. This has got to be the best comment. Sick berm. I guess they never sawed that coming. Hidey-ho, neighbor, my uncle and the fence. Where I live, the fence put up by the builder and on the property line is called a builder's fence. To replace or repair the fence, you need both owners' consent in writing. My uncle's house has 2 such fences on either side of the property. The fences were old, and because of the size of the fences, were cost prohibitive to replace. The year this happened, it was very rainy and the fence collapsed in one section. Now, Uncle takes pride in his property and had been trying for years to get permission from his neighbor to repair it. The day after the fence collapsed, the neighbor came over and screamed at my uncle that he had to replace the fence because that the thing was an eyesore. My uncle was pissed, but because the fence was now dangerous, he agreed if the neighbor covered half the materials, totaling about $1,000. The neighbor did not agree and said, "You're going to replace the fence and use my contractor, or I'm going to call my cousin in the city, by law compliance, and he'll make you replace it." My uncle told him to call the city and slam the door in his face. Of course, a bylaw official shows up a few days later and give my uncle a notice that he had to replace or remove the fence in a month or be fined. After carefully questioning the official, and was told that it is only required to have a fence around your property if you have a pool. So the day before re-inspection, my uncle and his cousins took it down. The neighbor freaked out and screamed at my uncle that he had to replace it because he had a pool. My uncle looked him dead in the eye and said, "Not my problem. I'm in full compliance with the city just like you wanted." I found out because I went over with my mom to hang out, and we were greeted with the sight of the neighbor trying to pour concrete footings in the rain. Too long didn't read. Neighbor doesn't let uncle repair fence and calls bylaws compliance on uncle, resulting in uncle removing fence, causing neighbor to be fined by the city. When I first read the story, it wasn't clear who had the pool, but the OP updated in a comment saying that the neighbor has the pool and his uncle does not. So basically, the neighbor is the one who had to replace the fence because of code violations. Do you know what time is it when an elephant sits on your fence? Time to buy a new fence. To my current subscribers, thank you for being a part of this community. Please remember to help me grow by liking and sharing. If this is your first time here, I would love to have you subscribe to Reddit or Not, the channel that will mildly entertain you. Always remember, you are awesome and you matter. Let your voice be heard. You can share your thoughts, stories, and comments below. Until next time, Ron out.